Yeah, that was when that's right after that the genocide, or there are actually people that believe that it was not genocide say that took place, right?
What did you say, Elder?
No, I said that's when they had the genocide in Rwanda, when they had the struggle between the Tutsis and the supposedly the Tutsis and the Hutus, and thousands of people were killed in that particular struggle.
Yeah, you're right. That sort of inter-tribal conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis was activated and escalated by internal and external forces where they were being pitted against each other in the typical divide and rule strategy that is often used against us as Africans. And my understanding was it was close to 1 million people who perished in that horrific genocidal um, process. And I have a friend who was a former organizer in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, who lives in England with his wife, in London, England, to be precise. And he went, excuse me, he visited Rwanda about 3 or 4 years, and there are some very positive changes happening in the society. And at the heart of that society is the people never have forgotten the genocide and have committed to learning valuable lessons from the genocide took place. And one of those valuable lessons is the respect for human life. And for us as Africans, despite our linguistic differences, despite the different national borders we live in, whether it's Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Canada, or wherever, we are one people, and we must continue the process of ideological and practical unity in order to achieve a unified socialist Africa that benefits us and future generations.
Well, I remember in Uganda there was a struggle between uh, some of us, Kwame Ture, and there was a group of people from New York and a group of people from uh, the rest of the United States. And the New York people, to be perfectly honest, they wanted to control everything. So we were considered the communists, and unfortunately, Kwame Ture was on the other side, and there was a big struggle between Abdul Al Kalimat and what's his Kwame, and
Yes.
Ilombe Brath was on Kwame Ture's side. I've known Ilombe Brath forever and ever and ever, and it was a real that was a real rough situation, because I think the Nation of Islam people were there, and they put the anti-communist thing on us, and it got pretty, to be perfectly frank, it got pretty ugly. Yeah, it got
Yes,
it,
yes, you are correct. There was intense ideological struggle between different ideological camps, if I could put it that way. And at the same time, dialectics teaches us that there is positive and negative in everything. And that ideological struggle, it it exposed um, all of the delegates, all of those who attended, to the different spectrum of ideas within our movement. So you're right. You had the Pan-Africanist ideological camp, if I could put it that way. You had those who were said to be communist. You had the Nation of Islam, But the good thing was that despite our ideological differences, the collective contributions to the different forums of that Seventh Pan-Africanist Congress in Kampala, Uganda in 1994 led to us agreeing certain resolutions, agreeing certain follow-up work that needed to be done, which helped to move our struggle for the unification of Africa and our people to another level. So sometimes struggle can be ugly. Sometimes struggle will be intense. But as long as we can respect each other's humanity and know that we're on a similar pathway, despite our differences, we can move together as a people. Now, the other side of the coin is that within the Pan-African movement, we've historically also had to identify Africans who have been intentionally working against the interests of our people. And when we look at the African states, the 54, 55 African states, there are African governments on the continent who are not working in the best interests of our people. And there's going to come a time when we are going to have them uprooted in order to achieve the unification of our continent. So we can't be naive, we cannot be gullible and just say that the imperialists and the capitalists and other enemies of African people externally are the problem. We have a serious problem on the continent of Africa of African heads of states and governments and their cronies exploiting the masses of our people and acting, as Kwame Ture used to say, as the scum of the earth. So we have to be very forthright and honest that we have internal enemies, and there is going to come a time within the African Revolution that they will have to be dealt with in different ways. And I'm not advocating violence, but we're going to have to, as a people, determine how they should be dealt with, either removed from government, sanctioned, or whatever strategy is necessary to make sure that we achieve the best interests of our people, which is a unified socialist Africa.
I don't know if you were there, but at that particular conference was Julia Wright, the daughter of Richard Wright, and she presented a paper. I think I still have a copy of the paper that she presented. But you know, she's an example of you know, her father was a member of the Communist Party. He broke with the Communist Party, and you know, he lived in Paris, and you know, like if you study Richard Wright, he's a classic example of a very intense and a person that went through a lot of different, you know, different issues, uh, uh, different ideologies, and he wrote the Pan-Africanism of no, that was George Patmore that wrote Pan-Africanism of Communism, but Richard Wright wrote the book called The Color Curtain, which was about the Bandung Conference. I don't know if you heard Julia Wright is still in the land of the living. She does a lot of work. I think she's in she's in Paris. She does a lot of work around Mumia Abu Jamal. A lot of work around Mumia Abu Jamal. She's been on the show many times.
I did not hear or see Sister Elder Julia
Right.
Wright,
Hmm.
but I will say that the work that she's done and continues to do reflects a consciousness and a commitment to the Pan-African movement that is to be commended, that is admirable, because the Seventh Pan-African Congress happened in 1994. And if we do our math, that was 31 years ago. And yet she is still doing the work. She's older. At that time, I was, you know, in my 20s or so on. I'm in my late 50s now. And so my point is that the struggle is eternal. And some of us We get tired, we get sick, some even get disillusioned. So I want to commend Mama Wright for continuing that struggle. And I want to commend you, Elder Norman Otis Richmond, for the continuation of your outstanding contribution as a walking history book and an icon in our community. You have enriched the struggle with your genius in respect of radio interviewing techniques, media, and your past involvement in Pan-African and revolutionary organizations. So I want to commend you because it's not easy to continue the struggle as we age. So I just wanted to make that point.
I was in and out of Toronto. I was underground at that particular time, so I was not involved in a lot of the day African Liberation Day activities in Toronto. But at that particular time, Howard Fuller, who later became Owusu Sodoke, who went back. Now he's back to Howard Fuller. Howard Fuller, I could call him Howard Fuller. Howard Fuller was born in Shreveport in Louisiana, like myself. I was born in Louisiana, not in Shreveport, but he moved to Milwaukee and he became a member of a group called SOBU, Student Organization for Black Unity. I can't, I forgot what it was about. He became a member of SNCC, and he was a follower of the. He was at one time was Kwame Ture's right hand man, and he became. He broke with Kwame and joined the a Maoist organization, and then well, now he's a Republican, but that's a whole another issue. But he went to Mozambique and went with the guerrillas and wanted to recruit people from the Western Hemisphere, not just from the United States, but from the Western Hemisphere, the Caribbean, Canada, and America, to actually fight in Mozambique. And the MPLA, no, Frelimo, pardon me, Frelimo is the organization that was headed by Samora Machel, who was killed in a I think, well, he was killed by the state, but anyway, they told him basically to go back to the Western Hemisphere and organize people to fight against their own, or to put pressure on their governments uh, for to cease, uh, to force them to do better, or not necessarily, that's too liberal of a term, but to put pressure on their governments to stop them from moving in the affairs of Africa. And he came back and he organized. He went from territory to territory. Came to Canada, was in the United States, all over the United States, Jamaica, Trinidad, Guyana. I think in Guyana he hooked up with UC Quana, who had just turned 100 years old. He went to Jamaica and he hooked up with uh, what's the brother's name that used to be the head of the Jamaican Communist Party? He's right wing now too, but uh, the other brother in Antigua, Tim Hector, Maurice Bishop, and they organized demonstrations all over the Western Hemisphere, and there were thousands and thousands of people who turned out in Toronto. I think Rap Brown's brother came to Toronto, and Angela Davis's sister came to Toronto. Elaine Brown of the Black Panther Party was in Washington, D.C. Walter Rodney went to San Francisco. His speeches, part of his speeches on YouTube. And you had people in Jamaica and in Antigua, Trinidad, and all over the Western Hemisphere. There were thousands of people that came out, and we put out a newspaper. Contrast was a Black weekly newspaper in Toronto, Ontario, and we put together a newspaper. It was the African People's Party, The African People's Party was led by Max Stanford Jr., aka Muhammad Ahmed, and you had three parties. You had the All African People's Revolutionary Party, created and founded by Chairman Omali Yeshitela. You had the African People's Revolutionary Party, All African People's Revolutionary Party, created by Kwame Nkrumah and Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And we put out a newspaper and we send it all over the Western Hemisphere. You can go to YouTube and check that newspaper out. And that was a very successful African Liberation Day, and that went on for 3 or 4 years in terms of being very positive. But then we began to split the movement. Ideological differences split, the African liberation movement, and you had the people that were pro the Soviet Union, some people were pro China, and some people were taking the position of trying to unite everybody. And that was the situation with African Liberation Day. And today we're trying to put all those pieces back together, and it seems to be working pretty well because of what's happening in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, Mali, and and Burkina Faso. So it's we're on coming back as a people.
I agree, Elder Norman, that, and thank you for providing that historical overview of the different phases of the struggle and the importance of African Liberation Day and the different ideological streams that enrich the struggle and continue to do that. We in the All African People's Revolutionary Party, our only program is to build the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So African Liberation Day is our most important event on an annual basis. Just to give a brief snapshot of some of the history of African Liberation Day. African Liberation Day was actually founded in 1958 by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah on the occasion of the first Conference of Independent African States in Accra, Ghana. And at that time, there were only 8 independent African states. And then 5 years later, after 1958, in 1963, what was then African Freedom Day was changed to African Liberation Day. And the date was changed from 15th of April, 1958 to May 25th. So 1963 was a decisive turning point in terms of the history of African Liberation Day, because number one, the name was changed from Africa Freedom Day to African Liberation Day, and the date was changed from April 15th to May 25th every year. So since 1963, African Liberation Day has been commemorated all over the Pan-African world. Now, the other thing is that Kwame Ture, as political secretary to Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, he took the party's sort of black print. He was living in Ghana at the time, and he was living in Guinea because Nkrumah had been overthrown while he was out of the country. So while he was living in Guinea with Ahmed Sékou Touré and Kwame Nkrumah, who was invited to Guinea after the coup d'etat, he took the concept of building chapters of the APRP out of the country and came to the United States and Canada in the 70s, around 1972. And that's when African Liberation Day commemorations took place in different parts of the US, Canada. He went to England and helped to organize African Liberation Day and chapters of the AAPRP. So I say all of that history because the first African Liberation Day in Toronto took place around 74 or 75, 1974 or 1975. The commemoration that we're having for May of this year is scheduled for next Saturday, May the 24th, from 1 to 5 p.m. And the theme is Africa for Africans, revolutionary Pan-Africanist unity across borders in the battle for socialism against imperialism. So Africa for Africans, revolutionary Pan-Africanist unity across borders in the battle for socialism against imperialism. So that's next Saturday, May the 24th, at 163 Queen Street East in Toronto. We're asking our community who attend, if possible, to wear white as a symbol of unity. There's going to be drumming, the pouring of libation to honor our ancestors. There's going to be information about the All African People's Revolutionary Party. There's going to be presentations, vendors, food, and most importantly, a call to join organization, because it's one thing to have African Liberation Day to commemorate our history and to further the objective of Pan-Africanism, but we need our people to join an organization that is fighting for the liberation of our people. So that's one of the key objectives of African Liberation Day, is to encourage our people to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party or another organization that is fighting for the liberation of our people, or create an organization for the liberation of our people.
And let me say this in closing. In 1958, something was taking place in the Congo. I don't remember exactly what was taking place, but Mohamed Babu, and I don't know who else was with him, but anyway, they were in the Congo and they ran across a young man that impressed them. And that young man's name was Patrice Emery Lumumba. And they brought Patrice Lumumba to Ghana in 1958, and that started the relationship between Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Emery Lumumba, who would be assassinated on January 17th, 1961. That's just a piece of history that a lot of people don't realize the role that Mohamed Babu, who wrote the great book African Socialism or Socialist Africa, you know, he helped bring Patrice Lumumba into the whole worldwide African liberation movement.
Yes, and Elder Babu lived in London for some time, from what I recall.
Yes, he did.
Yes, because I met Elder Babu and I remember his radiant smile, his political genius, his historical knowledge, but also his undying spirit of love for our people and his activism in London. Even as an elder, he was still active until he transitioned. I don't remember the year he transitioned. I think it was in the late 90s, but I don't want to get that wrong. But I do remember Elder Babu, who made an outstanding contribution to the Pan-African movement. And it shows the continuity of the history that Elder Babu had organized with great son of Africa, Patrice Lumumba, who was the leader of the Congolese national movement and the first democratically elected president of the Congo, until, as you correctly said, Elder, he was assassinated by the enemies of Africa. And I recall more recently, in the last, I think it was the last 12 to 15 years, his family had been demanding an inquiry into the circumstances of his death. And I recall reading something about his wife, who I can't remember if she lives in Africa or if she's in Belgium. I can't remember. But they were still trying to get answers in respect of the circumstances around the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in January of 1961 by the forces of Belgian imperialism and other enemies of Africa. So long live great son of Africa, Patrice Lumumba.
Patrice Emery Lumumba, Maurice Mpolo, and I forgot the Maurice Mpolo was the youngest brother, and Joseph Okito, yeah. Jo
Uh-huh.
Joseph Okito, I think, was born in 1909, and Lumumba was in 25, and Maurice Mpolo, who was the young, he was young, the young, I put this in quotes, he was a young hothead. I remember in the film, they were saying that they were becoming independent in the film. And I think there's more than a grain of truth to this. Maurice Polo was saying to kick all the Belgians out, all of them, period, And there's a scene where the moon was kind of laughing and say, we can't throw everybody out. There's certain things that we have to learn how to do, before we throw these, if there's certain skills, certain things that they have control over. We at least you have to learn how to do certain things that they brought in here, So that's a kind of a real funny scene if you remember seeing that in the film.
Yeah, I think that question is still very relevant in terms of what's happening in Africa today. If we look at the developments within the Sahel alliance between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, we saw that Captain Ibrahim Traore, who led a coup in 2022, recently, in the last, 6 to 9 months, kicked out the French military forces out of Burkina Faso because his ideological position is that Africa for Africans, those at home and abroad, and that we should exercise our sovereignty by organizing our own military within Africa, organizing our own agrarian reform, organizing our own education system that comes from our culture. So consequently, he has introduced some very progressive changes within Burkina Faso in terms of innovative technology to generate jobs and to empower the people to use technology to advance the society. He has nationalized gold mines and is introducing refineries in order to refine the gold within Burkina Faso, as opposed to shipping it outside of the country or outside of Africa for other people to do that. And there's other progressive things that he is doing with respect to the infrastructure, building roads, and so on. There's so many progressive things that he's doing. So I make that point because we as Africans, with Africa being the richest continent on the earth, it is the richest continent, richer than Europe, richer than any other continent. We have the power and the capacity to do for ourselves. We really don't need anybody else. We have the resources, we have the cultural genius, the skills. We have everything that is needed in order to exercise our sovereignty as Africans on the continent and the diaspora.
And he has aligned himself with the Russians. He has a relationship with Russia as well as, and a lot of people have flipped out over this. he's working with the North Koreans now, and a lot of a lot of the ruling class are flipping out over that.
Well, it's similar to what the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso did. That's Thomas Sankara, before he was assassinated in what was it, 1980s,
7, I think.
1987. And he was in his late 30s, like Ibrahim Traore. There's so many similarities in terms of their consciousness and their vision. I know that Ibrahim Traore was inspired by the legacy of Thomas Sankara. But the point is that in a war for the sovereignty of Burkina Faso and Africa, you have to form alliances in order to counter the 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 terrorism militarily, ideologically, politically, and propaganda-wise of France, of England, and these other imperialists who want to overthrow the government. So it was a wise strategic move for him to ally himself and the government with Russia in order to counter the intrusion and the military invasions and ideological counterforce of France and these other forces in the United States of America, um, to motivate himself and the people of Burkina Faso to achieve their own sovereignty. So I see it, and the party sees it, as a strategic move to form these alliances with Russia for military support, for economic growth and development of the people. You have to ally yourself geopolitically with other progressive governments as a strategic and tactical move.
I remember. I guess we have to really round sum up, but I remember one of the things, another criticism that some of our people had of Kwame Nkrumah was he never really he was not he never really took the line of being anti the Soviet Union, or he never took the line of being anti the People's Republic of China, or of North Vietnam. You know, he saw those elements as his allies.
Well, those people who are criticizing, I would push back and say, number one, what were they doing in the Pan-African movement? I know some of the people who criticize do nothing, and I know some of the people who criticized
Working for the state.
Dr. Kwame Nkrumah were involved in the Pan-African movement. But again, as as the leader of a newly independent African government, Ghana got or achieved its independence on March 6, 1957, we have to look at the balance of power and the geopolitical reality of Africa vis-a-vis the West. The French and the British imperialist forces were a threat to Ghana at that time. So the government had to look strategically at aligning itself politically and economically as a newly independent African state in the context of the forces, the imperialist forces who wanted to overthrow the government. You cannot isolate yourself and think that you can go it alone as a newly constituted African government. You must ally yourselves with other governments who might share the same ideology as you, and you do it as a strategic buffer against the greater enemy, so to speak. So again, Kwame Nkrumah, I think, strategically had to assess the geopolitical balance of forces, the threat to his government from the British and the French and the other imperialists, and make allies as a buffer to protect Ghana. So we have to look holistically at the balance of power as we build the different phases of African unity.
Point, as they say, point well taken. I completely unite with that. I think we would like to thank you for this great interview, and we will, as Melinda said, we will be bringing you back.